out there and welcome to the 77%. We are in Namibia. We want to find out how much history, particularly colonial history, still matters today. And so we are in Windhoek to talk about the country's historical past, but most importantly, Germany's role in all of this. But before then, we've prepared a refresher video for you for a better understanding of Germany's historical past in Namibia.
The concentration camp here in Swakopmund marked one of many violent aspects of German rule in Namibia from 1884 to 1915. It began when merchant Adolf Luderitz started acquiring land through intermediaries in southern Namibia. Protection treaties, often misleading or signed under duress, started the transition of land ownership from indigenous people to Germans. Ultimately, this was about 835,000 square kilometers, roughly 1.5 times the size of Germany. Here in German Southwest Africa, Germans didn't just come to exploit, they also came to settle. While local leaders like Hendrik Witbooi and later Samuel Maharero initially tried to cooperate with the German colonial administration, local Nama and Herero groups suffered increasing pressure from Germany's imperial expansion. More conflicts followed, and in 1904, war broke out between Germany and the Ovaherero, culminating in the decisive Battle of Waterberg. German General Lothar von Trotter issued his extermination order, which spared no Ovaherero found in German-occupied territory. Men, women and children were forced into the waterless Omaheke, where many of them died of thirst and starvation. The remaining Herero and Nama people were put in so-called concentration camps in Swakopmund and Shark Island near Luderitz. Here they were forced to work without rest, prone to sickness and abuse. For this reason, the camp on Shark Island was even known as Death Island. When the camps were closed down in 1908, the remaining Nama and Herero communities were left in a very fragile and vulnerable state. German settlers and soldiers bought up land cheaply and promoted their culture. Using coerced or poorly paid labor, they built railways, towns and businesses which they would control for decades to come. During World War I, South African troops expelled the German colonial administration by 1915. However, many settlers stayed. Namibia still faces big challenges in remembering this violent colonial history and seeking justice for the communities most affected by German colonialism.
Welcome to the 77% special debate. I am Fatu Elika Muloshi and we are here in Katutura, a suburb of Windhoek. We want to talk about how much history, particularly colonial history, still matters today. Well, it's steaming hot, but I've got some energetic young students alongside some wiser experts here at the Jacob Maringo School who are going to help me expand this conversation. And I'm going to start with the students, of course. I will start with you, Josephine. Tell me, when did you learn that your country, Namibia, was in fact colonized?
I learned this when I was grade 4. We had social studies in grade 4, and then they not like really in details, but like we got to learn about it in details like when I was grade 7, and then grade 8 like we also taught about it again in history, and then also this year in grade 9 again.
So you learned it in school, yeah. Right? So what about you, Lina? It's that correct? Say your name. And when did you learn that your country was in fact colonized? Did you talk about it in your household or at school?
Yes, indeed. Like my grandma, she was like taken or kidnapped by the colonizers, and she was telling us about it. And then I came to ask my teacher about it. Then we got taught about it at school. So.
Okay. All right. Let me just also come here to you, Rosemary. Your story, what you've heard about your country, is it the same as what they've said already?
Like this year, we went to the museum to find out more about information about colonialism, the freedom of Africa, of Namibia.
If I may just come to you, Nata, why is it so important to learn about this particular history, especially that for the students to learn about it?
Mm-hmm. You need to know where you're coming from, what happened in the country. You need to know that certain mistakes shouldn't be repeated, and you need to know why there are certain dynamics in the country.
Yeah. If I may just come to the students briefly here. Have you also experienced the stories at home where you told by your parents what happened during that time? And does that story in any way differ from what you've been taught in school, for example?
I don't think this is different of the story where the one that was told home and the one that I'm being taught in school, because like my parents at home actually told us how they suffered back then, and also in school we're being told the same story, like about our school, how Miss Ottilie came to this point of naming it Jacob Marenga, and how the names were named after the great heroes that really took part in these events, like how we are colonized by this German and all that.
I mean, Nathan, let me just come to you. She mentioned how the school was named after people who fought for freedom. And why is it important for us to memorialize such people in such a way?
Because history is mostly told by the winners, and history is sometimes nameless and faceless. So it's important to remind the community that heroes and liberators and people who moved the community forward came from amongst our midst, came from the south of this country, came from the central part of the country, and came from our families. So coming to Jacob Marenga, we always know this was one of the heroes from the south, and he played a major part in Namibia's anti-colonial struggle. He was one of the first that waged a guerrilla war against the Germans, and that is very, very important to understand. He was one of us.
Interesting. And if I may just come to you, do you recall any heroes that you think their stories are very compelling for you?
Yeah, the heroes that I've learned about is Sam Nyoma and Hendrik Witbooi, and Sema Maherero also. They also took part of fighting for independence at the time, and also Swapo. Yeah.
All right. So we had this same conversation with students in Germany about Germany's colonial history in Namibia, and they had specific questions for their Namibian counterparts. Let's take a look at that and be right back. Shall we have a look?
Yeah.
All right, come on. Okay.
I would like to know what you learn in history class and what your curriculum looks like, especially in regards to colonialism and Germany's influence on Namibia.
How do you think this colonial history is remembered? Do we only remember those important generals, maybe only the Germans? Are any Africans even mentioned at all?
I was wondering if in your day-to-day life you feel the after effects of colonialism, and if maybe it's still like an important aspect and it's still like present.
Germany, in fact, colonized Namibia from 1884 to 1915. And during that period, tens of thousands of Namibians were killed. Others were dispossessed of their lands, while some were kept in concentration camps. And so you've heard the students ask, what aspect of German colonialism are you being taught in specific terms in your school?
We are being taught about the good impacts and the bad impacts, the effects, the buildings that were left, the people that took part in this war.
All right. So you said the good and the bad impacts. So what were some of the good impacts you were told?
They brought clothes, they brought spices, they helped us build buildings, taught us more things than we knew before.
So you were actually elevated according to what you've been told. The good impacts included that. What about you? What other impacts do you know? She mentioned good and bad. Were you also told about some of the bad impacts? What could that be?
Some of them Namibians were killed. They took natural resources from Namibia. They put Namibians in concentration camps and tortured Namibians. They made Namibians feel very bad.
As a Namibian and as a Namibian young person learning about your country's history, do you think it's important for you to know about these things that they've mentioned, the good and bad impacts of colonialism?
Yeah, it's good to know the bad and the good impacts of colonialism, because it helps us to remember the people that fought for freedom and to avoid the past mistakes.
All right. It's very interesting, and they've all mentioned in specific ways how their people were kidnapped, how their grandparents were taken to concentration camps, and that precisely will bring us back to the Herero and Nama genocide of 1904 to 1908. Looking at the effects now, what are some of the socio-economic impacts of those atrocities today?
Land dispossession is one of the biggest ones, because people lost their land, people lost their cattle. Remember, after the infamous extermination order, people were driven into the Omaheke. People went up to Botswana, wells were poisoned. And then the land was there for the taking. And the land was called Kroonland, and it was sold then by the Imperial Reich to settlers and farmers. And they could buy the land. Some generals got the land. But the land up to today is not in the hands of the people that had it before. And already during colonialism, black people were pushed to the periphery of the urban land, and that's how the ghetto started. And in 1959, it was made law that all the black people must leave town. And there was a curfew, and people were moved from the old location to Katutura. Katutura, where we're standing now, even means the place where we don't want to be. Kakurukadi Mungunda played a big role, and there was a huge demonstration on the 10th of December 1959. The people went, and black people went and demonstrated at the old administration and said, we don't want, people were killed. Kakurukadi Mungunda was killed and others, and it ended up by people being moved from town here to the outskirts in Katutura. And Katutura was basically just a place where the cheap labor was living, and the cheap labor would get a bus. With a bus, you go into town from Monday to Friday. You are either a gardener, a security guard, or a cleaning lady or cleaning man. You do what you need to do in town, and after 5 o'clock curfew, back to Katutura. So that geographic separation is felt up to today.
Okay, the land that you spoke about,
yes.
Until today, we don't have lands. Most of the
So land is still a contentious issue in Namibia?
Yes, until today, most farms are owned by the Germans. You know, they are owned by whites and all that. Even if I have to acquire a plot here in Vindu, it's very expensive. But this is our ancestral lands. We were supposed to get it for free, but still, we are not getting it.
You are not getting it. And if I may just ask you, I would say that the first impression I got of Windhoek when I got here is that it's so German. The streets are called Strasse, Klein Windhoek. These are German words. As a young person who is speaking English and perhaps your own mother tongue, how do you feel about seeing things like that?
I don't really think it was necessary for them to come to Namibia specifically and colonize us, because most of the water sources were like poisoned for the hereros. Okay. And a lot of people and animals died from that. And talk about vegetation also had an impact on vegetation because of the poison and stuff.
Okay, all right, let me just come to you, Mr. Abraham. I want to really understand your perspective on everything that they've said.
Yeah. I am Herero and I am Damara on the one side. The other part of my family is German. And there's this big conflict in between both of us. The Herero family feels that the genocide and everything is horrific and has stripped the country of its dignity and the Herero and Damara people of their lives and their future. The other side of me, which is ostensibly German, or is German, carries with it a sense of guilt to a certain portion. And the biggest problem we have, or I have as a person, is trying to get the two sides to meet. And I believe through the education of sitting between the Germans and the Hereros, maybe we can try and find a solution and a way forward.
All right. So you are sitting on the fence because you could not bring the two sides of your history to meet. I would just put a pause to that and just come to the teacher here, because you are teaching them colonial history. Looking at the complex nature of Namibian society, one would say it's also important to teach them cultural history, for example. Is that something that you're also focused on?
Okay, we have different cultures here in Namibia. And ever since the Germans colonized Namibia, you know, a lot of people lost their cultures. They had to adapt to what the Germans were forcing them to do and then to leave theirs and all that. So we are teaching these kids basically, this is what our cultures used to be before the Germans came, and then when the Germans came, and then now.
Okay. No, that's interesting, because I also wanted to know whether you've been taught what happened during the pre-colonial era. Does any of you want to chip in on that? Do you know what life was like for your people before colonialism and what changed after colonialism? Jiwan, yes?
Yeah. I heard that before they came, Africa was just one big colony, no borders and stuff. And then the Germans came, and then there's the scramble for Africa that happened. Now they cut Africa into pieces. Like, people could not move freely like they used to.
I would just come to you, Rosemary. Is there anything that you would want to add on that? What they were talking about, the scramble and petition for Africa?
Yeah, about the example, like this night shift, you are not allowed to go to the German area around 9 o'clock. Yeah, that's it.
Okay. I mean, Neta, if I may just come to you, we've heard very interesting remarks. The students have been told that Germans did the good thing because Africans were living in one big bubble, somehow living in peace. But when Germans came, they decided to introduce certain measures and certain way of a certain lifestyle. Where do you think this narrative stems from?
History needs to be taught living. You need to experience it. You need to go to living museums. You need to go to museums. You need to talk to the elders. You need different sources to get the full picture, because somehow here some elements are missing clearly. Because we were aware that there were different nation states in Africa. We are aware that in 1884, in Berlin, in the Berlin Congo Conference, Africa or the interest of the Europeans in Africa was divided, and this is how the borders came about.
There was the scramble and petition for Africa, exactly. Just to be precise. Yeah.
Exactly. But what it wasn't all just idealistic before. There were wars, there was conflict, there was animal theft, there was slavery. African kings and queendoms, they sold slaves. They sold the slaves from the neighboring nations or groupings or from the enemy. So there was positive and negative even before colonialism.
I'll put a pause to that because there are still institutions or businesses in Namibia that have links to the colonial past. Let's take a look at how that happened and be right back.
Germany's colonialism in Africa cannot be told without the Woermann family, one of the most influential German trading dynasties. This building here in Hamburg was even its headquarters. C. Woermann, a shipping and trading firm from Hamburg, traded along the West African coast and even setting in Douala, Cameroon in 1868. Now, when Karl Woermann's son Adolf took over the family business, he had an ambitious idea for trading in Africa. He believed Africa was a great market to sell German products like alcohol and a source for cheap labor to produce valuable raw materials for German factories.
As a logistics company, Woermann was an enabler of genocide in what is now Namibia, as they were the most important company who organized the troop transports from the German Empire to German Southwest Africa in that time. Woermann relied heavily on forced labor, and that even played out in the genocide, where Woermann ran up an own concentration camp, for example, in Swakopmund, for the hard labor of unloading the ships on the beaches of Swakopmund.
The Woermann Company eventually lost influence in Africa after World War I, but descendants of the German company remain active in Africa. Although the company has not fully apologized, the damage brought by the greed and violence of the Woermann Company still scars communities in Cameroon and Namibia to this day.
If I may just ask the students, anyone can answer. So when you look at yourself as a Namibian who learned about your history, and of course you've heard everything that they've said and what you've also said, that the Germans did not also do quite very nice things, how does that shape the way you see Germany when you hear the word Germany?
When I think of Germany, I think of those the people that colonized us in a way and took our resources and maybe even killed our ancestors.
Interesting. And what about you? What everything that you've learned right now, how does it shape the way you see your country, Namibia?
I see it in a good way, actually, or in a bad way, because many of the heroes and Namas, they were killed by the German, and we lost our land and our resources and our diamonds and stuff, and Namibia is like not developed, kind of.
And someone said, yeah, you were saying something. And what exactly did you want to say?
Yeah. Okay, when I hear the word Germany, it just takes me back to the olden days where my grandparents and ancestors suffered back then, like, and the loss of land that we have lost, our cattle, like, we are really not developed because of them, because of the mineral resources that they took from us. Like, if we had our mineral resources, we could, like, Namibia could be a developed country who couldn't be living like the way we are living today.
Interesting. And what about you, Rosemary? Do you find yourself forgiving what Germany did, for example?
Sometimes yes, because they build for us roads.
Okay.
And they build for us houses, but at the same time, the houses are what we say. The houses are expensive, and they're supposed to be ours.
And they're supposed to be your houses.
Yeah.
Naita, the role of women, of course, like I said, much of what we know about this history is of men, but we also do know that women were very much affected by colonialism and the oppression, what it had on their lives. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Mm-hmm. After the genocide, most of the people that perished, that were killed, that left the country, it left open land and it left mainly women and children. Mm-hmm. So the women became the workers. The women were pulling the ropes from the ships for the Verman line. The women had to clean the scalps of their families' members. The women were the ones that had to pleasure the soldiers or that had to please the soldiers or that were raped. The women were the ones that had to then preserve the culture and bring everybody around the fire and remember everybody how strong we actually are.
Yeah. So now, moving forward, what exactly do you think it will take for Namibians to move ahead of everything that has happened in the past?
We can get past it, but we can never forget about what the Germans did to us. Even if we go to our family, like our grandparents, they'll still bring it up because that history really hurt them. Just like we feel it, but we don't feel like how they used to.
So they're still hurting. Yeah. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, like the only way I think like to forget about this whole thing is like I also heard about the story about the skulls of our people that they took like to German. Like if they return the skulls, I think that there will be peace between Namibian and Germans. I think they will forget about all this and they will be at peace. Like they will have to bury their people in the country, and that will just make peace with the Germans. Yeah.
By the way, there are about 400 Namibian assets housed at the German Ethnological Museum in Berlin, and some of them have never been exhibited. And if we're talking about, she mentioned money, and she mentioned about bringing back, the skulls. What exactly is that message sending here?
Finding closure. Finding closure. It's very important to find closure. The Joint Declaration can play a huge part. Working with the museums, working culturally together, getting information.
What will closure take? Because right now, as of 2021, of course, we know it had to take Germany over a century before they could acknowledge that what happened to the Nama and the Herero people was in fact genocide. This is the period of 1904 to 1908. But now, as of 2021, Germany has committed to fund Namibia about 1.1 billion euros in development aid for the next 30 years. Could that be a starting point to reasserting a common humanity here?
We need to start somewhere, and there's lots of different points now where we're starting,
Yeah.
but it's one of many. It's money is not the only solution.
So you said it needs to start somewhere, and I think that's very interesting because this fragmented history, this fragmented Namibian history, how does it solidify the need for a unified Namibia today? Is that a conversation that Namibians themselves are ready to have, Ms. Virginia?
Yeah, they're ready to have it, I think, because we really need to move on. We cannot be stuck on one thing, and we need to move on. It has been a very long journey, and
I will just come to you. What exactly do you think it will take for you as a young person to get past everything that has happened to your country in the future?
More diversity. Like, really, most people don't know Germans. If we could get to know them and get their perspective, it would be better. More students, learners, teachers, etc. Anything will really help.
Interesting. And Neta, I will just come back to you. How can Germany and Namibia then reconcile their shared colonial history?
It's very important to know of each other and to know about our past. And we want to move on because we don't just want to be stuck in victim mode. We don't want to talk forever, oh, poor us, poor this, poor that. No, we have agency. We know what happened, but we want to work together. In fact, Germany and Namibia has been working very well together the past even 40 years or longer. They've been, most of the tourists from Europe that are coming here are Germans. Most of the students that are coming here doing internships are Germans.
But when I hear everything that they've said, I can really sense very strong emotions coming out of their sentiments, that when they see Germany, they're thinking about people who took their lands, people who did X, Y, and Z. So how can that perception be changed? What will it take right now?
Fatu, we want to overcome the trauma. We want to get out of victim mode. What you heard here today is what happened in history, the reality of it. And like the students said, there are good and bad sides. So the good side is we all want to move on, and we want to give our youth opportunities for studying, opportunities for work, opportunities to get to know different cultures.
Okay.
In the end, we want to overcome the trauma.
Yeah, Mr. Abraham, and what role can young people play in also keeping the memories of the past alive, and just generally Namibians themselves in memorializing the past?
Figure out what you believe is right and wrong with what has happened and what can be corrected. Then I need you to take it forward and try and develop. And like Naita says, we need to get out of the victim mode here right now.
Well, I think this has been a very interesting debate. You've heard from all of what they've had to say. It's about healing. It's about forgiving. It's about empathy. And I do not know if I have the answer to this right now, but I do know that Namibians have a lot to say, and they should indeed be listened to. This was all we had time for. I am Fatu Elika Moloshi in Namibia. Thank you so much for watching.